All right, everybody, welcome to the Remodelers on the Rise show. I'm your host, Kyle Hunt, the owner and founder of Remodelers on the Rise. Way back 15 years ago, my daughter just turned 15, and we were pregnant with her when I started this little venture. Time flies when you're having fun, right, Mark?
Absolutely.
It does fly by. And I have a wonderful guest today. His name's Mark Richardson. This is the second time he has been on the Remodelers on the Rise show. He had so much fun the first time that he came to Michigan to visit me. He knocked on my door. He's like, Kyle, when can we sign up to do the Remodelers on the Rise show again? I said, Mark, relax. I'll get you going. I'll get you on here. It was something like that. It might have been the other way around where we're like, Mark, that was wonderful. Can you please come back on the show? We got a lot of great feedback on it. Mark is an author, a columnist, an advisor. He has a career's worth of work in the design build world, a lot of success throughout his career. And when we did the other recording, it was related to the sales process side of things. And what Mark's going to talk about today is some insights into what's going on the macroeconomic scale. What are we seeing in our industry and in the demand for remodeling work? Talk about how the consumer is kind of shifting here in 2023 and what we can do there. And also just thinking through what are some adjustments or some things we could be doing and should be doing as remodelers to continue to move forward. Mark, could you do a little bit more of an introduction of yourself, a little bit of who you are, and then we'll get into that macroeconomic conversation.
Sure. So oftentimes, and thank you, Kyle, for inviting me to join you and your audience today. Oftentimes because of writing books and columns, and I'm involved in Harvard University and several other things, they think that that's really what kind of my roots or what I'm all about. But my roots actually go all the way back to the 70s in architecture. And my thesis in architecture school was design build. And I would arm wrestle with my professors at that time who kind of believed that, architecture and design and construction should be kind of a separate kind of church and state, so to speak. And when I got out of school, one of my thesis advisors and I started a little, design build business where we would go out and meet with clients, and then we would develop the designs and the program and the contract, and then we would strap on our tools and build it ourselves. And it was kind of the ultimate little design build business. Well, he decided to go back to teach, and I joined a fella by the name of Fred Case, who had a very small construction company in 1980, Case Construction. And within about a year or two, we changed the name to Case Design Remodeling, and really took off like a rocket ship. And we grew the business about 20 times in 10 years, and then we diversified to handyman and kitchen and bath services, and then ultimately a national business. And then when I stepped down as president, we were just shy of about 100 million in revenue, and became, chairman of the business. And then when I left the business completely, I've been, doing a lot of writing and certainly radio show, podcasts, different kinds of things, to be out there helping and supporting the industry.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It's almost like you got this in your blood and you can't get it out of there, can you?
Well, it's kind of a little bit of a cliche, but when you love what you do, it's really not work. So I thankfully really enjoy and feel fortunate to be in this industry and get a chance to, continue to, contribute.
Awesome. You mentioned Harvard. Just a quick, Harvard University came up in our house over the weekend. My son, who's in high school, did his first official job interview at Panera Bread. He's got a couple friends that work there, et cetera. So he comes home from his second interview. He passed the first interview, sat down with the general manager. Pretty sure the general manager was about 26, 27, And he said, Dad, I absolutely killed this interview. I mean, I was talking about taking personal responsibility. I was talking about how teamwork needs to be at the forefront. He's like, if I would have been sitting there at a at a Harvard University interview, they would have said, "Come on in. You're going to attend school here." It was so good. It was Harvard good. I said, "All right, buddy boy," and he
There
did get
you
the
go.
job. But yeah, so Harvard came up over the weekend. We'll see. All right, touch on the macroeconomics. What are you seeing in your studies, in your reports? What are you kind of sensing out there related to the macroeconomic? There's been talk of, are we in a recession? Is it coming up? Should we be worried and concerned? What are you kind of seeing there?
So, I always think, professionals should be, kind of watching the stars and planets out there. And
Hmm.
I think there are a few elements that I'd throw out there that really gives you some kind of perspective on things. On in the economy, just in general, yes, there's obviously some softening that is going on out there. It led a group about 6, 8 months ago that, the economists that were joining the group said, if there is going to be a recession, it's going to be relatively soon and it's going to be short. And we haven't really had it yet. But if we do have some kind of further softening, I think it should be short. But, a couple of things that I think are going on that are a little bit more specific to our industry, remodeling. Um, Harvard looks at something called the LIRA, which is the leading indicator of remodeling activity. And it's basically a series of about, 7 or 8 variables that they look at, is it thumbs up, thumbs down, and then
Hmm.
they put in an algorithm and then determine, okay, what should the growth be? And, in 2012, I'm sorry, 2022, we had about 12% growth in the industry, which, is throwing everything in one big pot together. Better companies were experiencing 20, 30% growth. But,
Hmm.
as an industry, and, going into this year, they were projecting about 5 or 6%, and they just updated it to be about 3 to 4%. And, for many people, they see 12 to 5 to 6 to 3 to 4. They say, oh my goodness, the sky is falling. However, when you look at the last 25 years, it's averaged about 4%.
Hmm.
So we're not really talking about fundamentally different than it's been over a long period of time. Another indicator that Harvard looks at is interest rates. In interest rates, there's a lot of buzz and talk about interest rates, but for remodeling, it's really a double-edged sword in that, for new housing, it's obviously a bit of the kiss of death. However, for remodeling, homeowners are not going to want to go out and replace their existing, 3%
Mortgage.
mortgage with a 6, 7% interest rate and literally see their monthly payments go up 2 or 3 times what
Right.
it is. So, it's obviously causing some pain in residential construction, but not necessarily in remodeling because, you gravitate back and what are you going to do? What's interesting on interest rates also is 80% of all remodeling is paid for with cash, not finance. So as you think about interest rates, while there's a lot of buzz in the news about the impact of that, it's not necessarily a bad, and I'd say it's kind of a blessing and a curse for remodeling.
Remodeling side.
Another macro kind of element to keep an eye on, especially with design build firms, when we saw in 2008 the crash, um, the better design build firms dropped, I would say, the average ticket 30 to 40%. So the average size project dropped down dramatically. Well, most businesses can't handle 30 to 40% drop. And, the number of clients and the number of projects didn't drop. It was the average ticket. So you compare that to today, and the average ticket for most remodeling companies, that are more professional, that average ticket has not gone down, and in many cases, it's gone up
Hmm.
over the course of the last months, not down. So when you look at some of these key factors, average ticket, interest rates, those kind of things, I would say at a macro level, things are just fine. It's just they're a little bit more stormy, a little bit more uncertain, but they're not necessarily, thumbs down. Everything is, a challenge out there.
Gotcha. So couple things I'm hearing there is one, pros pay attention to what is going on. Do we become obsessed with it? Do we become crippled by it? No. Is what's going on in the macroeconomic level have 90% of the impact of how our business is going to go? No. But does it play a factor? Absolutely. Does it give us a little bit of some potential understanding of what's coming up so that we might make some adjustments? Yes. What you're describing there, without being a full out economist, what you saw, what we experienced in 8, 9, 10 is much different than what's going on here today. And that first one, that LIRA, the leading indicator of remodeling activity, the fact that that's slowing down, the key word is it's still growth. The industry and remodeling activity is still growing. It's not growing at as big of rate. And that's what I've been hearing from a lot of my clients and the remodelers I work with over the last, it's getting to be now 9 to 12 months is, this is not shooting fish in a barrel anymore. People are pumping the brakes a little bit more. People are being a little bit more thoughtful. I'm hearing, where it used to be, by the time we sign design and development agreement, walk them through there, our closing percentage is way, way up here. That closing percentage, they're losing a few more projects during design and development. Still a very high close rate, but it's an understanding that while it might not be as hot as it's been the last few years, it's still there's still some good numbers out there. So it sounds fairly optimistic of what you're sharing there. Sky's not falling.
With some of the different groups that I participate in and lead, I really see there's what I would call the haves and have-nots. And on the haves, they're having good to record years. And that's about 20, 25%. On the have-nots, they're really struggling. And, that maybe is another 20, 25%. And then there's the group in the middle that are doing just fine. But what I find interesting, Kyle, is there are some common denominators with the haves and have-nots. One of them is on the have side, they're very focused on marketing, lead gen. They're very focused, not taking their foot off the pedal of their marketing efforts. They also are really sharpening their axe, and they're adjusting sales process, sales tools. They're integrating different things into how they're going about selling. They're using some different techniques. And then last but certainly not least, operationally, they kind of have their act together. Every project's not an experiment. They have processes and systems in place. And, if you think about it somewhat metaphorically, if you're not constantly looking in the rearview mirror about fixing everything, you can focus a little bit more to the future and focus on doing the right things and growing the business. And like I said, many are having record years. So yes, the waters are a little bit more stormy in terms of the market. And it's not this, standing in line kind of the go-go times that the pandemic handed us, but it is still quite healthy.
It's the way you describe that of, they have on the operational side and the process side, they have their act together, meaning it's running smoothly. They're not spending more and more of their time trying to fix things that are broken. And there's only a finite amount of time that a business owner or leaders in a remodeling business have to work on the business, to think through what's coming up next. And when you have your act together on the process side, when projects are running pretty smoothly, it allows for more time for the proactive, forward-looking side of things, to spend some more time on marketing. And yes, if anything that these stormy-ish waters are showing is that dust off that marketing plan and let's start executing. We have been lazy when it comes to marketing the last 2 or 3 years because we've been able to be lazy. We have been tripping over a lot of leads that have been coming in so quickly. And then sharpening on the sales process side, type in Remodelers on the Rise, Mark Richardson, and our interview related to some sales process improvements and best practices will pop up. Good. So that gives a little bit of the macro. I appreciate that. That gave me some insight. I know it gave those listening as well. So the second thing we wanted to chat about is What are you seeing as far as how the consumer has changed or is changing? I may have hinted at that in some of what I shared earlier, but what are you seeing from your seat?
Yeah. So, and as you said, 18 months ago, we were just kind of starting to come out of the pandemic, but we're still in it. Homeowners, I think, were relatively empathetic. They were listening to what's going on in
Hmm.
supply chain, which, by the way, supply chain is projected to be much better by the end of Q3 and Q4. But they were for the most part willing to stand in line. They understood what was going on. They're relatively patient. Whereas today, as my friend Tim Torrey with Engage shared, the homeowner today has become feral. And, I had many years ago when my kids were little, they wanted a puppy. I got a puppy, but I had two cats at the time, and the puppy and the cats didn't get along, or at least midnight, the one cat. So I started to let the cat outside more, and the cat became feral. So I understood what feral meant. And,
Hmm.
when she made that comment, homeowners have become feral. I Googled it, and it means escape from captivity. And they have become, they're out there controlling the process. They're out there, with a lot of other competing kind of interests, with travel, with all other family related kind of things that are going on out there. And they also are not patient. They're not patient to stand in line. So they're watching price escalation and all of that. They become very difficult. A lot more cancellations going on. So it is a very difficult time. As much as I talked about the macro kind of environment being fine, the client environment is I think more difficult than certainly it's been in a long time.
Hmm.
And the reason I think that's so critical is because if you're doing your processes and your systems as it relates to the client facing things the same as you were doing, a year and a half ago, or even pre-pandemic, you're probably falling short. You're probably seeing lower close rates. You're probably seeing more unhappy clients in the process. You're wasting a lot more time, on things that don't necessarily go anywhere. I had a call with, one of the chief analysts at Google, and she said, homeowners today are acting like they want to do remodeling. They're
Hmm.
not actually doing it; they're acting like it. They're almost like fake remodeling clients out there. And if you can't distinguish between kind of the real ones and the fake ones, you're going to be spending a lot of time and energy going in the wrong
Hmm.
direction.
Why do you think what's behind the shift from empathetic patient to feral?
Well, I think again, I think that they truly have escaped. I think that they have a lot of other competing priorities. I think that you're competing against their ignorance about, prices are going to come down, not go
Hmm.
up. You're competing against their fears, fears about things. And we've seen so much price escalation. It's almost like a rubber band is stretched and stretched to the point that homeowners are saying, I just don't want to do $150,000 kitchen, and in my whatever $500,000-600,000 house. It's just not worth it to me.
Hmm.
So therefore, what else do I want to do with the money? I'm going to go spend the money on other things. So you're competing against,
Yeah.
many other things. They're not really appreciating the professional remodeler experience, and certainly not minding taking a little bit more risk and going other directions.
Gotcha. I think people listening to this would probably are nodding their head at the when you said, they were more empathetic, understanding, willing to stand in line, patient. They saw everything that was going on. They were just happy to have somebody that was willing to do the job. And when you said fair, I think I'm hearing that from clients, of just that uneasiness and perhaps the fears perhaps that I'm just done being patient. We've been patient for years. I just want this done. But that last thing that you mentioned, I think may be a big part of it. That rubber band, that stretch of the budget of going, oh, it's just frustratingly too much. I think for a section of our clientele in remodeling, we're running up against that. And when we're running up against that, the patient suffers, the frustration increases. And so to sit in that just for a moment, how do we combat that? How do we offset that? How do we continue to move forward when we're up against that on the consumer side? What are a few thoughts there?
So Cleveland Research, which is another kind of
Well, it doesn't sound as fancy as Harvard research.
well, but they do a lot of amazing research for the investment community and different manufacturers on how to position their product offerings and those kind of things. And one of the things they shared, recently, that they said, the vast majority of the homeowners want to do the project and are willing to lower the finishes, specification, scope to get a project. And that has not been the narrative until more recently. So you ask, what can you do about it? I think remodelers need to be super proactive as selling down, not allowing the project to budget creep go out of control. So you go into every single deal, quite frankly, talking about, creating more of a master plan and then focusing right now on portions of this master plan that is consistent with what they want to invest in. You go into every project not necessarily assuming that just because you like Marvin windows or Pella windows, that is the alternative that they should consider. Go even so much deeper than that and even consider putting in builder grade windows, not because you're endorsing them, because you're helping the client buy. Because at the end of the day, with the budget escalation and creep that happens, you're running the risk of just the project not happening at all. I would at least argue that homeowner would much rather have a new kitchen than a series of blueprints in their closet gaining dust that didn't get built because you, as a remodeler, allowed the budget to go out of control. Your role as a remodeler is to be that tour guide and control it. So respectfully, I say to everybody out there, if that project went from 100,000 to 150 to 200, that's your fault. It's not just the world or certainly the client's fault. Just because they had a yearning for tasting nicer things, you have to control that process.
That's good. That's a fresh thought. And it's kind of contrary to maybe where we've been living and the type of selling we've been doing for a while. That idea of, I know you were looking to do this size scope, but for this budget, here's what we would be able to do. And kind of that down selling, that should, because the two things are true. The one, the rubber band, the stretching, remodelers are seeing that with their clients. And that leaves a couple options. Either you keep selling the value of it and you roll the dice to see if they can continue to increase their budget and make it work and piece it together. You can go that route. And or you can be, like you said, super proactive to selling down. Show them these different options a little bit more, even if it pains you a little bit because you're like, I don't want to put those windows in. I'd rather you go with the nicer finish for this or that. To your point, getting a project done and finding a little bit of middle ground with that, we may need to be an advocate. May need to advocate that more and certainly give them the option. I think sometimes we are romantic about the type of work that we do and we want it to be at this level and with this type of finish. We may need to think through that as the consumer confidence and the consumer approach and attitude are changing. That's good. That's a fresh thought. And it's something that people can try out for sure.
The other element, I think, with all the variables out there, Kyle, that I think remodelers need to do is they need to be more masterful at creating urgency, not expecting urgency to come from the homeowner. And, creating urgency or mastering urgency is something that's a skill. It's how you pepper in data in the conversations. It's how you know, have them understand why this is the best time of the year to be doing this project. And it's like an old fashioned scale. If there's enough reasons to not only do a project, but do a project now, then the likelihood it's going to tip over and you're going to get the project, sold, I think is much, much greater.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, I think we touched on a bit of that at our previous interview. So I
Yep.
will point people to go look that up. We need some fresh thoughts related to the sales process. Okay, both of those things were very helpful, and I want to go to our third item, which is just related to, given what we've talked about and just the environment that's out there. When we look at our remodeling business and we think about what do we need to be proactive with adjusting, what do we need to be proactive with perhaps thinking about strategically or very practically. What are some of your words of wisdom in that area?
So, I think obviously the fact that people are leveraging or listening to a podcast like this, is certainly critical. That you're not necessarily just focus on doing the work. You're thinking about how to do the business and
Mm-hmm.
and reflecting on that. I think it all starts with that. Making sure that you're looking out to the horizon of where you're heading and what your vision is, more medium and long term. I find a lot of people are making very short term decisions, and when I'm talking to them or working with them, I oftentimes say, but that's great. But let's project out 6 to 12 months from now. Is this the decision? Could be a personnel decision,
Mm.
could be a technology decision. Is this the decision that you really want to be making if you are looking just purely at 6 to 12 months from now, rather than just a band-aid fix today? So I think the more that you're in the day to day, but you're looking out a little bit further and making those decisions, really consistently with what your vision of the company
Mm.
is. And, a lot of it, I think, related to that is how you're spending your time. I mentioned earlier about the importance of marketing. I'd say today, business owners, business leaders, um, they ought to be spending at least 10, 15% of their time on marketing related activities. If they're not, which most aren't, you're not going to have the fuel coming into the business that you need. I'm not saying spend 10 to 15% more. I'm saying put more calories and energy in marketing related activities, because if you do, I think you'll have more choices of the right kind of
Mm.
clients, right kind of projects to work with. And then training is really critical. I mean, a good friend of mine who sold his businesses recently, they were more in the specialty, not the full service side of the equation. He said when we started the business, it was a remodeling business. After about 5, 6 years, he realized he was in the sales and marketing business. And then in the last few years, he realized he was a training organization.
Mm.
And when you think about that, is how much time and energy are you putting into training yourself, your team, and like with a lot of things, training is an investment that you should expect a good return.
Mm. I liked all of those. I'm gonna, if I could just unpack a couple of them. One, what you were talking about is just having a thirst for learning. You want to keep that remodeling business going forward. You got to keep learning. You got to keep studying. And going to that last part, how much time are you spending on training and doing a 20-minute little training once a month? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking consistent sit downs, going through things, working on streamlining processes, doing a ride along with a project manager, doing a ride along with a lead carpenter who you haven't done a ride along with in 2 years because they're pretty self sufficient. Wow, is that good use of time? When you get out there and you invest the time in your office, sitting down with your office manager and saying, show me how you do that, and you haven't done that in a while, that there's all kinds of opportunities for training. How are you spending your time marketing related? If you were to say, hey, leader, 10-15% of your time should be marketing related, and you were talking about calories, how would you invest some calories if you were marketing side? What are a few of your favorite areas to invest when it comes to marketing?
Yeah, one of the interesting things, Kyle, is when I, am interacting, whether it's physically or virtually, with any remodeler, and I see some challenges and flaws. One of the questions I oftentimes ask is when was the last time that you did a ride along?
Mm.
As you say, whether it's sales or whether it's production oriented, and 9 times out of 10, the frequency is very, very infrequent. And my simple prescription is just get out and do more ride alongs. The answers are there, but you've got to commit to doing more ride
Mm. You like that one? Is that what you wrote down when I was saying it?
alongs.
Okay, good. So I like that. And back to the marketing item. What are a couple of your favorite places for a leader to invest in marketing? Is it content creation? Is it with their strategic partners, people that could refer them? Where do you typically gravitate towards?
um, I don't want to sound too philosophical, but it is to me. We never had in my business a challenge with this because a big part of the leadership was focused on creating the marketing mindset.
Mm.
And when you deputize your members of your company to realize and think every day about what can I do to generate opportunities, it's all about time, energy, calories. So more specifically to your question, yes, of course, you have to have a technology driven with, all the things that are oriented towards your website and social media efforts and all of those all of those kind of things today are like wearing shoes. So
Hmm.
they're very basic. You've got to do that. But the biggest thing I see, quite frankly, that continues to miss the mark is on, the amount of attention going to your client base, but also, an interesting little kind of data point. We got in many, many businesses get more referrals from people you never do business with. And if you really think about that, when you go out on a lead, they may not buy a project from you, but are you creating at least a referral client out of
Mm.
it? And if you can put a lot more time and energy in, in really getting out there to help people so that they're out there spreading the word, talking about your brand, the advice that you're giving, regardless of whether you did a project for them or not, you're going to see better returns.
That's good. That's contrary. No, qualify them out, qualify them out, qualify them out. No, 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 no. They reach out. How can we serve them? We have to protect our time. We don't want to waste a lot of our time, but how can we serve this person very well? Whether that's a Zoom call, whether that's going out and seeing it in person, even if that project doesn't go forward, that's a good reminder. There's referrals that come from people. And I think it immediately came to me. I remember calling an insurance company years ago when I had some questions, and I'm like, I wasn't ready to change or do anything else. They just helped me. Well, guess what? When I was ready, they were ready, and I've referred them multiple times. So that example resonates with me. And then the last thing I wanted to follow back up on, you talked about vision. You talked about kind of that looking out on the horizon. And I think when we what I'm realizing each year that I'm doing more and more coaching, I'm realizing, okay, yes, the short term and the practical and the next step thing that you need to do, that makes sense. But wow, if we have a clearer vision of where we're going, it colors the decisions that we're making, and the energy we're bringing to it so much differently. What's yours as we kind of wrap up? Share with me how you approach thinking about that maybe longer term vision, even if that's 2, 3, 4, 5+ years down the road. How does a remodeler start to think about that? And in your experience, how important is that to remodeling success?
So many, many years ago, Kyle, I thought everybody in remodeling, especially folks wanting to grow a pretty substantial business, should care about the same things.
Hmm.
And what I realized after getting out and touching a lot of very, very good remodeling companies is The product might be very similar, i.e., a kitchen addition, a deck, whatever. However, what the owner's motivation is dramatically varies.
Mm.
So what I realized was that I at least identified 7 different motivations of owners, and we're all a product of a blend of these things. But what I try to understand when I'm talking to when I'm talking to an owner as it relates to the vision is understand, what do they care about? What's most important to them? And based on that, then I think the vision can start to be, kind of clarified. For example, I worked with a company out in California that the owner had passed the baton to, his sons, and they'd done very, very nicely. And I said to the he was still CEO, but he had passed the baton to his sons. What do you really care about? And he said, what I really care about is my son's well-being. He didn't talk about profit. He didn't talk about top-line sales. He said my son's well-being. Well, based on that, we were able to say, okay, what is the vision of this company as the vehicle to ultimately create a lot of really positive health in that. So you got to understand, what is your thing? What's important to you? What's your motivation? And then I think you can start to articulate and crystallize what that vision should be.
And the 7 motivations, is that in one of your books, or where could we read more about that?
I've written quite a bit about it, meaning articles, and done podcasts and things on it. I can certainly send to you some information on it, and we could also, on a future discussion, just go down through the 7.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying. Makes all the sense in the world, and that does take something that's kind of ethereal and kind of, well, how do I kind of grab a hold of that? And perhaps by going through and looking at the motivations, that can draw it a lot closer to where it needs to go. Yes, and so we'll put that in the show notes, a link to a little bit of that, and then you just opened the door to coming back on the show in the future.
Well, if I can help, obviously I will.
Wonderful. This was very helpful. Wonderful topics. And Mark, if people wanted to read one of your books or reach back out to you or get a hold of you, what would be the best way to look you up?
Well, a couple different. They can obviously contact me through my website or through my email address, or you could reach me, through the magazines or different sources. I also have a vault that probably the 7 motivations are in that vault. It's www.remodelingmastery.com. That there's articles and some webinars, those kind of things that you can always go there and connect it.
Wonderful. Remodelingmastery.com. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. Mark, thank you so much for your time, for sharing that insight. It was very helpful, and we will talk again soon, my friend.
Sounds great. Thank you, Kyle.